In June of 2023, decorated intelligence official, Air Force veteran, and claimed whistleblower David Grush would come forward in an article published by tech defense website The Debrief. In this article, written by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kane, Grush would make the extraordinary claim that the U.S. government had secretly recovered non-human craft and biologics, and were attempting to reverse engineer the technology. In a rather dramatic U.S. congressional hearing in late July of that year, Grush would go on to say the following in his opening statement to U.S. representatives and to the world.
My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force, both active duty Air National Guard and Reserve, at the rank of major, and most recently at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full-bird colonel. I was my agency's co-lead in unidentified anomalous phenomena and transmedium object analysis, as well as reporting to the UAP Task Force, UAPTF, and eventually, once it was established, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. I became a whistleblower through a PPD-19 urgent concern filing in May 2022 with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Following concerning reports from multiple esteemed and credentialed current and former military and intelligence community individuals that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and multiple inspectors general, and in effect becoming a whistleblower. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency.
In the time since David Grush came forward, many eagerly awaited to hear from just one of the individuals who had seemingly worked on the possible retrieval of some of these UAP. More than a year had passed and all went quiet. But that all changed on January 18th of 2025, when one of these alleged whistleblowers would finally come forward. This would take form in an exclusive interview from News Nation, with reporter Ross Coulthart interviewing a man who claimed to have retrieved UFOs.
My name is Jacob Barber, and for the last 30 years, I've worked for the U.S. government and its private partners in both an official capacity as an enlisted man in the United States Air Force and in an unofficial capacity for the broader intelligence community as a contractor. Over the last 3 decades, my work has been very diverse and has included the recovery of downed UAP of non-human origin. I am pleased to share that as of a couple weeks ago, I have fulfilled a promise to our friend David Grush by getting myself into a skiff with Congress, and I have provided top-secret SCI testimony on the subject matter of UAP. With this behind us, I'm pleased to be at a place where I can share information with the public.
But this claim by Jake Barber isn't unique. Many have come forward throughout the years to claim that they had worked on such retrievals. And those claims were made by a man who went by the name of Thomas. The following account was detailed in the book, Earth, an Alien Enterprise, researched and written by Timothy Good. According to Good's writing, he was contacted by letter in the summer of 2009 by an ex-serviceman of the Royal Air Force about something that had happened to him while stationed in England. Good would meet with this ex-serviceman several times, and the account that the man would detail would leave Good completely floored. This is the story of Code Orange.
Code Orange changed my life, and if ever proven, it will likely change yours as well.
You are now somewhere in the skies with your host, Ryan Sprague.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. There have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
Flying saucers actually exist.
It was particularly heartening to me to see the rise of interest among scientists, and particularly astronomers.
It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in color, and it had a dome.
There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So it's a strange, small red light. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site. Is it back again? Yes, sir. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird.
I think that from my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
We're sitting on top of an iceberg, and the enormous size and implications of the rest of that iceberg, that's what I'd like to know.
When you look up in the sky, you're off in a corner of nowhere. We're nobodies. Maybe if we looked around a little bit, we could learn how to be somebodies.
After joining the armed forces in 1955, Thomas, as Good would call him in his book, to ensure the ex-serviceman's anonymity, was stationed at various air bases and facilities throughout the years. He was eventually posted to RAF Weston Zoyland in Somerset, England, where, starting in 1958, he would find himself assigned to one of the strangest, most bizarre programs he could have ever imagined. Thomas would recall what happened one particular morning while on duty.
I was approached by my flight sergeant and discreetly told that I was to present myself in the squadron leader's office at 10 a.m. that morning, an invitation that one does not turn down. Also, I wasn't to tell anyone else of my whereabouts. Once there, I, along with 5 other airmen, were told to be on parade the following morning at 8:30 a.m. outside Hangar 1.
Along with the squadron leader and other officers from the base, there was also a person in a Navy uniform. The men were quickly snapped to attention, and the squadron leader reminded the men that they had all signed the Official Secrets Act, and from this point on, they would remain on this assignment for the remainder of their service in the forces, or so they thought. According to Thomas, the leader also said the following to the men.
He said that our duties would be extraordinary, and he was not exaggerating.
The briefing continued, as did the revelations.
We were told that we would no longer wear any badges or insignia. Furthermore, our unit would, ultimately, be rankless and anonymous. As far as the other base personnel were concerned, our unit was now non-existent. Only those of us involved, and yourselves, would know who the devil we were.
Then the instructions took an even stranger turn.
We were then told we would find an orange band on our left shoulder. We were not to remove these orange bands at any time for any reason. Moreover, we were forbidden to go off camp in uniform, and we were forbidden from taking the orange bands outside the wire.
Then came the final instruction.
None of us were to say a single word about that day for the remainder of our service, not even to our nearest and dearest. After all, we were signatories to the Official Secrets Act. That sort of aggravation one does not need.
The briefing was then brought to a close. They were to receive further explanation and instructions later that afternoon. And with that, they were dismissed and told to return to the hangar. Several hours later, the squadron leader arrived and promptly instructed them to take one of the 6 seats that had been set out. Each seat had one of the men's initials on it, and each man found their corresponding chair. Opposite the row of seats was a table with 4 chairs set out on each side of it, facing the row of 6 chairs. A moment later, the 6 men saw an official-looking car pull up outside the hangar, and the 3 men from earlier got out and walked inside. As the men took their seats at the table, they appeared to separate themselves, with the naval officer sitting with the squadron leader. Then the squadron leader began to speak.
He informed us that we each had been chosen specifically for the program, adding that each of us had passed our RAF entrance exam with higher scores than the rest of our respective classes. Furthermore, we were each recognized as the best airmen in our unit.
The squadron leader then turned his attention to what he had termed the project as, telling the men that the task would become extremely difficult as time progressed, and that the project had in fact been 6 years in the making. Then he told the men what the project would be referred to as.
We were told from here on out the project would be known only as Code Orange.
As this briefing continued, the unit were also told that all other personnel on the base had been informed that any soldier they saw with an orange badge on their uniform were, quote, unsensitive RAF work. Furthermore, they had been informed that they were not to question or interrupt any of them. If any other soldier did question them as to their work, the unit was instructed that they should report them immediately and treat it as a breach of security. Ultimately, Thomas, along with another member of the unit, we'll call him Alan, were put in charge of the project, at least within the parameters of the base. But the briefing was not over. Another man with particularly white hair, as Thomas remembered, informed the unit that he worked for the government, and he would go on to tell the men just what Code Orange really was.
Then we were told that Code Orange was a direct consequence of the Roswell UFO crash in New Mexico in the summer of 1947, something he described as an unfortunate incident that involved living beings from another world crashing to Earth. He would then tell us that Code Orange was about putting right, as best as we can, a bloody mess.
But this was only the beginning of the job description.
It would be our jobs to see if we could learn more about how to take advantage of the alien technology that was in the possession of the United States military at a hangar on our base. We were told that there had actually been 3 crashed UFOs at Roswell. According to what the Americans had discovered, each craft had seating areas within them that accommodated 3 crew.
This is when the white-haired man spoke up and made a shocking claim.
The crash retrieval teams had recovered 2 dead bodies and 2 that were alive. It was not known if there were other surviving occupants, and if there were, it remained unknown where they might be, or even if they were still alive. He then said there had been many other craft that had visited the Earth since then, and these craft were not all from the same place.
And then the 6 men were finally given the true core reason that they were there.
2 aliens were being held. They, apparently, could communicate with one another telepathically. However, when questioned by the Americans, they refused to communicate in any way. Therefore, it would be our duty to look after these visitors until they began communicating with us.
The unit was then led to their new quarters before their new indefinite mission would begin. Essentially, the unit would man the office and hangar from that point on. The offices and hangar on the surface looked no different than any other, aside from the all-white protective suits they had to wear and the heavy-duty weapons and ammunition that were kept in a large, shiny cabinet. And then there were the phone calls.
We would receive regular telephone calls requesting reports and to essentially check that all was well. These phone calls always came from the same female caller.
The first week of the operation, nothing of note happened at the hangar, but that all would soon change.
I received a phone call, this time from a gentleman, informing me that we should expect a special delivery to the hangar the following week. From the bits of need-to-know information I had received, I figured out that this delivery had arrived in the United Kingdom, somewhere in Scotland, from the United States. From there, it had been moved by train to Ilton Hall, and from there by vehicle to another station, RAF Merrifield, which was also in Somerset.
It was at approximately 11 a.m. on the morning of the scheduled delivery that would change Thomas's life forever.
2 RAF police corporals pitched up on motorcycles. They were escorting a wide load with a wooden crate. The thing was large, approximately 20 feet high and 10 feet deep. The hangar doors were slid open and the whole thing backed into the hangar to deliver its cargo.
It wasn't until the following day that the unit was permitted to inspect the contents of the crate. And when they did, they were more than shocked.
Inside was a grey, glistening metallic saucer. It appeared to have a window all the way around, but with no panes, just one strip of glass-like material. It was so sleek I could see right into the craft as clear as day. As we were previously told, I could also see the 3 seating positions with multiple panels of instruments around them. The seats appeared as if moulded from one piece of material and seemed as though designed for an occupant slightly smaller than an average human adult. Although I couldn't make out any specific flight steering, such as a yoke or control stick, all I could see were multiple keys, switches and buttons that stretched out along a sweeping panel in front of the seats.
When the sides of the crate had been fully removed, Thomas and several other men could see that the object looked like 2 saucers, one right side up and one upside down and pressed together. But it wasn't the shape of the craft that intrigued Thomas the most. It was an eerie feeling he had when looking at it.
It was as if the craft was alive, thinking. It was silent, brooding.
After Thomas and the others had studied the craft for several minutes, an RAF captain came forward and revealed more details about how the object came into the possession of the United States military.
According to the group captain, the object in front of us was the 3rd of the 3 that had come to the ground in Roswell in 1947. The first object had been badly damaged when it crashed to the ground, with bits strewn all over the desert. The second object also suffered substantial damage, but was, by and large, intact. The third one, the one in front of us, had come down of its own volition.
Then the account became even stranger.
After this craft had landed on the ground, the occupants opened a hatch, with 2 of them emerging from the craft before fleeing. The third occupant, however, remained inside the object, eventually standing up inside it. Then, right before the recovery team's eyes, it just disappeared into thin air. As soon as it had done so, the opening in the object sealed shut and disappeared as if it had never been there. An immediate search of the area was undertaken, and while the third occupant was not apprehended or ever seen again, the first 2 were. They were taken into military custody.
Getting to the point of the entire operation, the captain then detailed what happened next.
Following the disappearance of the occupants, the hatch on the craft has never been seen since. We were told by the group captain, we just can't bloody well open the thing.
The unit was permitted to study and observe the craft, wearing full-on hazmat suits. Days would go by as they would attempt to open the hatch, to no avail. Then another layer was soon added to the operation.
We were informed that in several days 2 alien entities would be delivered to the base, and it would be our job to watch over them.
The men decided to split into 2 3-man teams, each responsible for an 8-hour shift, with 1 man in each team manning the phones. The shifts operated from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to midnight, and midnight to 8 a.m. again, meaning a team was on duty 24 hours a day. The entities were delivered to the base in an RAF-V bomber. As the bomber landed, Thomas watched, both in excitement and anticipation. This wasn't merely a craft to study, but beings, allegedly from another world, that he was tasked with trying to communicate with. And soon, Code Orange would take its most dramatic turn yet. Greetings everyone, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. For over 7 years and more than 400 episodes, The Somewhere in the Skies podcast has always been free to listen to, but it's not free to create. So we offer several ways to help support our efforts and get rewards in return. If you listen to the podcast on Apple, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Somewhere in the Skies feed to become a premium Apple subscriber. Or you can join our Patreon campaign with several tiers available. Both of these options give you the same benefits and rewards: ad-free episodes, early access to the main show, and bonus episodes and content. Help keep the lights on at the Somewhere in the Skies HQ, and help us continue to grow by becoming a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/somewhereskies, or by clicking the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Thank you for your continued support, and keep looking up. Several hours later, the team was summoned in groups of 2 to meet their new cosmic guests. These guests were housed in a specially constructed glass container within the main hangar. Thomas described what he would see next.
There were 2 humanoid beings, grey in colour with oval or egg-shaped heads that appeared to be too large for their bodies. They were lying side by side in this container. Their eyes were large, limpid, and dark with no iris, almost like a seal. They had these incredibly small slits for mouths. They had nostrils, but noses and ears were absent. Their body and limbs were exceptionally frail. They only had 4 fingers and toes on each hand and foot. No thumbs, no big toes.
As he studied these strange creatures even closer, he noticed something very specific.
I could see what appeared to be a pulse coming from just under the bottom of the head.
This confirmed to Thomas that these beings were in fact alive. After each member of the unit got a good look at the beings and began to process what they were seeing, Thomas noted something that led the rest of the unit to agree.
One of the beings was slightly larger than the other. We deduced rather presumptuously that one was male and one was female.
Interestingly, the captain informed the men that the aliens in their care had been named G-32 and G-33 by the American military.
I later suspected that these were the 32nd and 33rd extraterrestrials to have been recovered by the military. We opted to refer to the alien that we thought was male as G, and the female as L.
Although the assignment was undoubtedly bizarre, Thomas and the rest of the unit made some remarkable discoveries about their otherworldly guests as time went on, such as realizing that the more time spent with them, the better their communication would be.
They had an ability to convey a sense of humor or sadness without any such expression appearing on their face. It was as if they could make us feel their thoughts.
As time went on, all 6 of the men became almost like friends with these beings, who in turn appeared to trust the men even more. And in one particular day, through a form of telepathy, the beings began to reveal some interesting details to the men.
They began to reveal warnings about the environment and our planet's overpopulation. They also claimed that human beings were genetically manipulated.
This certainly took Thomas and the others by surprise.
But not only that, they said that they were related to another species as a planned experiment by beings from another world.
But it didn't end there, as the bold claims continued.
They said that their civilization had been coming to Earth for many thousands of years, and that they were here to observe and, disturbingly, to decide if humanity had earned the right to survive.
As chilling as their revelations were, they were far from the only unsettling discovery the men would make about the nature of these beings.
During one of these communication sessions, it dawned on us that we'd never seen these beings eat anything, and when we asked about their eating habits, they would tell us that their race couldn't digest solid food, and so, consequently, they lived solely on blood and water. So, we asked how they were eating while here. That's when they gestured to the tubes running into the glass container, and they would tell us that those in charge of our operation obtained enough food for them to survive.
While this originally disturbed Thomas, he would soon learn that the blood obtained for the beings was from a nearby farm and was that of slaughtered animals. The meetings and communication between the 6 men of Code Orange and the beings would last for weeks. They would meticulously record every detail they obtained from the beings. The more they communicated, the more trust was built. But for some of the men, they just couldn't handle the information being revealed, and it would take a mental and physical toll on them. When their superiors noticed this, they called for a 72-hour leave of duties by the men. Thomas would return home to Barnstaple in Devon, obviously instructed to share absolutely nothing with his friends or family about Code Orange. His journey involved him having to catch a connecting train at Taunton Station. It was at the station where he would meet a stranger, and the events involving Code Orange would take an even more bizarre twist.
He was well-dressed, middle-aged, well-spoken, and he asked me if I would join him for a cup of tea while we waited for our respective trains. He sounded as though he had been a former airman, so I agreed to join him. After a while, it proved that my assumption was correct. He told me that he was with the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Navy.
Upon realizing that they were taking the same train, Thomas was invited by this man to join him in his first-class carriage so that they could continue their conversation. Once more, Thomas agreed. But as they sat there talking, the train chugging its way towards Devon, a strong feeling of unease began to creep over Thomas. He recalled that as he sat in an otherwise empty carriage with the man, that the man noticed he was guarded and, in fact, uneasy. The man would then tell Thomas the following.
He told me that his name was Tom Dryburgh, and that he was, in fact, a Member of Parliament. He began asking me about what type of work I did at the base, and I told him that I couldn't talk about it. He continued pressing me throughout that night, and I didn't give in. He shook my hand, thanked me for joining him, and we exchanged contact information.
According to the research of Timothy Good, author of the book this case is based upon, Dryburgh was not only a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, but he also had links to the Soviet KGB and other Eastern European intelligence agencies. It would be only a day later when Dryburgh would phone Thomas and would invite he and his girlfriend to the theater. During the course of the evening, Thomas was introduced to one Lord Alfred Robbins, a politician and well-known industrialist at the time, and allegedly the Shadow Foreign Secretary, so he was high up in the political rankings of the time. Thomas and his girlfriend found themselves at an after-show party with Dryburgh, where Dryburgh continued to press Thomas about the nature of his work at the base.
At one point, he even asked me to take a camera into the base so that we could take photographs to bring back to him. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point, and my girlfriend and I thanked him for the invitation and left. I never spoke to him again.
It was clear that Dryburgh was very interested in this particular base, having clearly sought out Thomas, all while this earth-shattering operation was seemingly taking place. So had Soviet intelligence somehow known that something had been transported there? Did they know of Code Orange? Or even more intriguing, did they know of the beings? Or even had something to do with all of this? The question swirled in Thomas's head as he soon returned to base and returned to Code Orange. and then the stakes never seemed higher. As the weeks went on, G and L would reveal further details to Thomas, specifically about the Roswell UFO incident and the reason they arrived in the first place.
They stated that representatives from their race had made contact with various world leaders following the end of the First World War in 1919, and then again in 1946 following the cessation of World War II. They claimed they had done so in order to offer assistance following the wars. However, each time they were rebuffed by our leaders. In light of this, following the second rejection in 1946, the beings had offered the American and British governments scientific instruments to forward human progress rapidly and without cost. And it was from this agreement that the Roswell event actually occurred.
Ultimately, the picture that G and L painted for Thomas and the unit was not a particularly positive one.
They told us that ancient teachings and wisdom had been twisted and, as such, misunderstood over the centuries, to the point where the world now had too many religions. Something they claimed humanity would suffer from as a result. Furthermore, they claimed that the technology that was essentially looted from the Roswell crash, and others, had the power to improve life immeasurably for humanity, with the potential for clean energy and abundant food supply for everybody. In the wrong hands, however, and without full understanding, this would never be realized, and of more concern could be used for nefarious purposes.
The beings would elaborate on their origins even more to Thomas.
Their people had been on Earth for thousands of years, including during the times of the pharaohs of Egypt. And they also told us that the pharaohs and the populace regarded them as gods. They stated further that many of the encounters told in ancient writings, including in the Bible, were slightly inaccurate retellings of ancient events, including the floods which caused much of the world's population to flee to the mountains. They further stated that these floods resulted in the land of Atlantis being submerged, which, they offered, was near the island of Cuba.
The beings then offered part of the reason they were on planet Earth to begin with.
Now and in ancient times, they were in desperate need of gold, also to a lesser degree silver, for use in their propulsion systems.
This was an interesting claim, as many kings and royalty of ancient times would accrue gold in many different ways. If we were to accept that these alien beings were in fact what we perceived as gods, could it be that these members of royalty were actually collecting the resources for these beings to travel the cosmos? Interesting questions to ponder, nonetheless. Communication with the beings would continue for some time, and although things were learned of the beings' origins and alleged motivations, one of the primary reasons for communicating was to, in fact, gain entrance into the sealed craft. But this, unfortunately, would never happen.
G and L informed us that while they could open and close the craft in only a matter of seconds, it would take massive power to brute force it. And what's more, if that was to be attempted, a self-destruct mechanism would kick in and the craft, with all of those around it, would be destroyed. We were instructed to try to persuade the beings to allow our entry, but they wouldn't budge. It seemed that our trust and communication skills would hold no sway when it came to their craft or its technology.
To Thomas and the other members of the unit, it appeared the Code Orange may have been drawing to a close. However, something quite dramatic would take place before that assumption came to be. To Thomas and the other members of the unit, it appeared that Code Orange may have been drawing to a close. However, something quite dramatic would take place before that assumption came to be. A few nights later, the team became aware of an increased presence at and over the base.
We could hear the sound of a helicopter overhead, and then the phone in the hangar began to ring. I picked it up and was asked if we had any issues at the hangar. And I told them, no.
As soon as Thomas was about to hang up, another unit member came rushing into the hangar, telling Thomas to come outside as there were lights zooming all about. Thomas informed the person on the phone of this and said he was going to go outside to investigate. However, the person on the phone assertively told him no.
I was told to personally watch the beings and not to leave them alone under any circumstances. So, being a good lad, I did just that.
Thomas approached the beings, and this is when they informed him that they were telepathically communicating with their people, and that a craft of theirs was to arrive and land. All the while, the bizarre lights outside continued to swirl in the skies, Thomas staying with the beings, who would then tell him the following.
They told me to wait and to be ready at a moment's notice.
The lights soon disappeared as members of the unit re-emerged, telling Thomas of what they'd seen. Excitedly, they all left for their barracks that night, not knowing, as Thomas did, what was about to happen next. It would be about an hour later when a vast majority of the base was asleep. Thomas and several others waited outside the hangar, staring up into the night skies. Suddenly, something pierced the clouds and caught their attention.
It was a pitch-black triangle, darker than the night. It started slowly descending towards us. It was truly gigantic and totally dwarfed our bombers.
At this point, the object was barely 50 feet above the ground, yet it remained completely silent and appeared to pulsate.
There were lights running along the side of the craft which appeared to be moving around with a specific rhythm. There were also windows, but I couldn't see anyone or anything inside. But the main thing that stood out was the lack of noise. No engine, no propulsion, no machinery, just silent.
Moments later, the craft descended to just above the ground. As it did so, the light began to flash even more intensely. A violet color of light soon illuminated the ground directly below the craft. It began to slowly rise once more, stopping momentarily when it was clear of the buildings on the base. It remained perfectly still for a few moments. Then, a bright flash of light.
It was blinding. It lasted just a moment. Through the light, I was able to see the craft dart off into the distance within seconds, disappearing out of sight.
It seemed as though the night's events were over. But then, another unit member ran outside, yelling for Thomas. This member was in shock and could barely speak. He gestured for Thomas to follow him inside the hangar, and when Thomas went inside, he too was shocked at what he saw.
The glass container which held the beings was empty. They were just gone. I asked the unit member what happened. What had he seen? He told me there was just a sudden flash of light, and when his eyes refocused, the beings had just disappeared in the blink of an eye.
Thomas would deduce that the flash of light outside was at the same exact moment as the flash inside the hangar as well, and he would come to a sobering realization.
It was a retrieval. They were going home. They had the power to do this all along, clearly. It was never a question of how, but when.
The next 48 hours were a blur for Thomas and the rest of the unit. Members of both the RAF and United States Armed Forces arrived on base to interrogate anyone who had seen anything that had happened that night. Thomas, who was basically in charge, was interrogated the most, especially after superior officers had learned of his meeting with a possible Soviet spy.
I told the truth about everything. They took down everything I said, and that was it. A day later, our unit was called into a meeting and we were told in no uncertain terms that Code Orange had been officially shut down and that we were never to speak of the events to anyone. We were then informed that any and all information was to be handed over to the United States for further investigation and handling.
And with that, Thomas and the other members would soon all find themselves relocated to other bases throughout Europe. All records of their having ever worked at RAF Weston Zoyland had been wiped clean, replaced with other various bases around England, as if none of this had ever even happened. The encounter of Thomas and the alleged Code Orange project is, without a doubt, one of the most fantastical accounts when it comes to alleged military recovery of craft and subsequent communication with the occupants of the craft. It should be noted that, at least according to primary investigator Timothy Good, that when Thomas would eventually release a book that included the story of this entire ordeal, he had to obtain permission from the Royal Air Force Historical Branch. And while they gave permission for the book to be published, they instructed that it had to be marked as fiction. Of course, whether this was simply to cover up the encounter in plain sight, or whether because that is exactly what the account is, fiction, remains a question. A question, like so many others, when it comes to stories like this from military personnel. Even if a fraction of this story were true, it would change everything we know about UFO crash retrievals. And as that specific topic gains momentum with the recent UFO whistleblower revelations, maybe we'll get closer to finding those answers we always seek somewhere in the skies.
The nature of what these beings told us was profound. It is, in my humble opinion, essential that all of humanity know the truth. It should not be held by any military branch, intelligence agency, elite group of the most wealthy, nor any one world leader or country. This is why I found it imperative to come forward and tell the story of my involvement. Code Orange changed my life, and if ever proven, it will likely change yours as well. Here's hoping, hey?
Let me be clear. UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. I believe we are in the midst of a multi-decade secretive arms race, one funded by misallocated taxpayer dollars and hidden from our elected representatives and oversight bodies. Excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that. There's zero doubt.
There's really two phases to the project going on there. It's understanding what we're looking at, and then once we understand it, is can we duplicate it with earthly materials and earthly technology? And, unless we've got a handle on both of them, all that technology is useless to us. I would like to have known a little bit more about the technology and probably kept quiet if I could have, and possibly never have said anything. I almost wish I had done that. It's really only caused headaches and problems, but I believe if I was given the opportunity again to go back in time and redo it, I think I pretty much would have just shut up and gone along with the program.
So a new whistleblower has come forward with a written report that this person has shared with some members of Congress and with me, and the report is quite extraordinary. It says that there is an unacknowledged special access program called Immaculate Constellation, which is the parent program, is the language used, crash retrieval, reverse engineering, and apparently a very large database of high quality photographs, videos, infrared videos, apparently much more sophisticated documentation of many more UAP encounters than have been released.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
This episode was researched by Marcus Sloth. To learn more, visit ufoinsight.com. A very special thanks to our voiceover talent for this episode, Paul Gledhill. Paul is the host of the Anomaly podcast. To learn more, to listen, and to subscribe, visit anomaly.co.uk. You can follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Just search for Somewhere in the Skies podcast. Please take just a few moments to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps us tremendously and could get us featured on these massive platforms. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.